Okay, so let's get started. Hold on, let me just put this on. Okay, so one of the fascinating mitzvahs and one of the most fascinating laws, and a lot of people have mixed feelings towards this law, the idea that the Gemara brings down in Megillah Daf Zayin, that Omar Rava says that Chayiv inish lebesume bepuraya ad lo yada ben or haman lebarach Mordechai. So the Gemara says that each person is obligated to be intoxicated on Purim until he does not know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. And this is one, a lot of people enjoy this mitzvah, a lot of people get nervous about this mitzvah, but it's a fascinating mitzvah. And just from a halachic perspective, so the Shulchan Aruch brings this halacha down kipshuto, that we have to fulfill this literally. Quotes the Gemara word for word, that we're all obligated to become intoxicated to the point where we don't know the difference, which is a very high level. What exactly is that level? So that's a discussion in the poskim. But the Ramah brings down after that you don't have to drink that much, but rather you just drink until a little bit more than usual until you go to sleep. And then once you're asleep, you don't know the difference. And he's coming from Rabbeinu Ephraim, because right after in the Gemara, right after Rava says that statement of Chayiv inish lebesume bepuraya, that a person is obligated to become drunk on Purim, or intoxicated literally on Purim, until he does not know the difference, the Gemara brings down the story of Rabbah and Reb Zera, where Rabbah kills Reb Zera. They get so drunk, it's actually very interesting. The Ben Ish Chai has an amazing pshat. He says that Rabbah said such high Torah that Imamish blasted Reb Zera out of his body. He couldn't handle it anymore. But regardless, they got to such a point where Reb Zera left this world, and the next year, Rabbah invites him back for Purim, and the day after Rabbah does Tchias HaMesim, he brings him back from the dead, and next year he invites him and he says, "You want to come back to me and for Purim, for the Purim party?" And Reb Zera says, "Who says that a nace is going to happen next year?" So Rabbeinu Ephraim says from this it must be that we don't paskin like Rava, but a lot of the posts can bring down that we do paskin like him. And regardless, there's definitely a shear. We definitely have to drink a little bit more than usual, and us chassidim, or we take it to the next level. But the idea is, it's a very interesting idea, because we know in Judaism, we appreciate the idea of knowledge. We appreciate das, meaning the mitzvah on Purim is to nullify one's das, to get to a place where one is beyond das, where he's beyond knowing the difference between Haman and Mordechai. But in Judaism, we appreciate being able to make these distinctions. We appreciate knowledge. We appreciate intelligence. As the Gemara says in the Nedarim, that Abaye says, "Ein ani ela b'das," that a real, true poor person is if one is lacking das, if one is lacking knowledge. And even more than that, the Gemara continues and it says in the Ma'arava, in the Ma'arava, in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, they said that the Kakani Machoser, that if you acquire das, if you have das, what do you need? The loikani makani, if you don't have das, then what do you have? The dalbe kulabe, that if you have das, you have everything. The loibe mabe. If you're lacking das, what do you have? First of all, what is das? What is the idea of das? We see in the Torah, we see there's a lot of different levels of das. There's first, we see by Eliezer the idea of ulamacharish ladas, that he was silently observing Rivka from a distance. Das is first the ability to observe, to be aware, consciousness, the ability to observe what's going around, what's going on inside. The Gemara continues and says, Im ein das havdalah minayin. Das is the ability to make distinctions. It's the ability to see right from wrong, to make decisions in life, to make separations. And also the idea of das is after you make that distinction, then to act on it. As the pasuk says, V'yeda odam eschava, the idea of connection, that das is chibur, that you could act on giving any given distinction that you made, and you can make proper decisions in one's life. So we see that das is something that's appreciated in Judaism. Das isn't something, das is a very important thing. So what's this idea on Purim? To get to a level of adilo yoda, to get to a level of bittul adas. What's this idea? What's the idea of bittul adas? And number two, hey Rabbeinu Meir. In addition, what's the idea of bittul adas? We see that, sometimes, you're together with good friends, and we could, on Purim, and through drinking, it could get you to a level above das, an increasement of knowledge, where people start talking about Hashem, Divrei Torah starts coming out, people start davening. By the way, davening on Purim is a very, very important thing. It's a tremendous eis ratzon, as the Gemara points out with regards to Matanos L'Avyon, and the Chassidish Svarim say that it says, Kol haposhe yad nostim lo, whoever sticks out his hand, you give to him. So the Chassidish Svarim explain that on Purim, so to speak, when we daven to Hashem, Hashem puts out his hand, so to speak, to take our tefillas, even if we're not worthy, even if we're not, just like by Matanos L'Avyon, we're not really supposed to inspect and look into, is he really poor? Is he really, truly an Evion? But we give no matter what, we give regardless. So too, when we daven to Hashem on Purim, there's a tremendous eis ratzon for us that Hashem is mekabel our tefillas without looking into, are we deserving, are we not deserving? It's tremendous eis ratzon. So, sometimes through drinking, we could get to levels of tefillah, we could get to levels, and that seems like it's an increasement of knowledge. And obviously, I think everyone understands, just anyone that the idea of drinking on Purim, if you're just drinking to escape one's problems in life, and that's your whole tachlis, that's not Chazal's kavana. That wasn't Chazal's intention, which just escape. So what's the idea of bittul adas? What's the idea of bittul adas on Purim, of nullifying one's das? So just to open things up, we just read Parshas Zachar, which we're just Mekayim, this last week's Parsha, 2 mitzvos aseh. One mitzvah aseh, one mitzvah los aseh, one positive commandment and one negative commandment. The mitzvah of Zachar, remember that which Amalek did to you while you were on the derech, leaving from Mitzrayim, and lo tishkach, don't forget. And this happens to be, it's the mitzvah aseh shelo azman grama. It's a mitzvah which does not have a designated time. And Chazal were koveya that they established that, or they made the evaluation that what's considered forgetting is that if you don't think about it once a year, or what's considered remembering. And therefore, we have to remember it once a year for us not to forget it. And Chazal specifically established Parsha Zohar right before Purim, because the whole essence of Purim is the idea of Mechias Amalek, of getting rid of Amalek. Who is Amalek? Who is Amalek? We spoke about this a little last week, but let's get a little bit more into it. So Amalek, the postic says Reishis Goyim Amalek, that Amalek is the first nation. As we know, there needs to be a balance in this world between positive and negatives, pure and impure, spirituality and the opposite, or kedusha and tuma. And therefore, just like the pasuk says, in Bereshis, and Rashi says, B'shvil Yisrael shenikareshis, that Klal Yisrael is the source and the root, B'shvil Torah shenikareshis, that Hashem created the world for Klal Yisrael to reveal Him in this world, for the Torah. Opposite that is Amalek. In the Kabbalistic Sfarim, it talks about how the 7 nations are opposite. The 7 nations, when we came into Eretz Yisrael, we had to wipe them out, unless they wanted to be Ger Toshav. But they are, the idea of the Sheva Umos represent that they're the negative aspects of the positive 7 midos. But Amalek is the source of all evil. And as we know, Amalek really roots itself all the way back to the sin of Adam and Chava. As the Gemara says, where do we know Haman? Where does Haman come up in the Torah? Haman min ha-Torah minayin. Where do we see Haman? So the Gemara says, Hamin ha'etz. That Haman and Amalek stem all the way back from the Chet Eitz Hadas. The Sfarim speak out how the Nachash had the same qualities as Amalek. Amalek is also Gematria Tsefa, which is a serpent, which is a snake. Amalek is very, very much connected with the Chet. Since they're the root of all evil, they take us back to the Chet HaKadmoni, the first Chet, which was the Chet of Adam HaRishon. So the more we could understand what happened by that Chet, the more we can understand who Amalek is and how to get rid of them within our own personal lives. So the pasuk says in Bereshis that Vayomor hanachash alo isha lo mos tamusun. And the serpent said to the woman, you are not going to die. Ki yodea Elokim ki biyom achalcha mimenu. Because God knows that as soon as you eat from it, v'nifkechu einechem, your eyes will be opened, you'll become enlightened. Ve'yisem ke'elokim, and you will be godly like. Yodea tov v'ra, that knows good and evil. So this needs to be understood. What does it mean? What was the Nachash saying to Chava? What was he trying to entice her with? He says that Ve'yisem ke'elokim, you will be like God. You will be like God, Yodea tov v'ra, that knows good and evil. So we have to understand what? Adam and Chava weren't aware of the fact that they were creations. What, they thought that they're going to be like God, that just like God created the world, so they created the world? And the question's even deeper, because the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Samach Aleph Amud Beis, and Rashi brings this down on the Megillah, that Haman asa atzmo Elokai, that Haman also made himself like a god. That Haman walked around having everyone bow down to him, and Haman viewed himself like a god. And it's a very interesting thing. What does that mean, that Haman viewed himself like a god? The Gemara says that Haman was a barber for 22 years. Haman was well aware of where he came from, and that the only reason why he rose to power was from the fact that Achashverosh brought him in, that he was an old schlepper, and that he rose to power. And that, it's very nice, you could fool everyone else, but you can't fool yourself. So what does that mean, that Haman osa atzmo ke'elokai? He thought of a god. And it's even more than that. Paro, we know by Paro, the Medrash says that Paro Rasha also made himself osa atzmo ke'elokai. He also viewed himself like a god. As the pasuk says, Li Ori Va'ani Osasini, that to me is the Nile River, and I created it. and the Medrash says that's referring to Paro, that Paro viewed himself that I created. He viewed himself like a god. What does that mean, that Paro viewed himself like a god? What does that mean? Well, Paro actually thought he created the world? What does that mean? So, to understand this, obviously none of them thought, Haman or Paro, neither of them thought that they created the world. But rather, they saw that wherever they turned, they were successful. Haman became the second to command of the king. He was very, very, very wealthy. He had everyone bowing down to him. Paro was the king of Mitzrayim. Paro, which was the world power at the time. No one was able to escape from Mitzrayim. And they thought, you know what? Obviously, they weren't attributing their accomplishments and their success to God, to Hashem. And they thought that, you know what? It must be that I got koiches, that I got superpowers, that I'm able to do things in this world by myself, independently, that without God, that I have the ability to accomplish, I have the ability to make things happen. They viewed themselves as being independent beings, completely disconnected, that they themselves have the ability to do things in this world and to accomplish and to be successful. They have koiches, they have powers. What the Nachash was saying to Adam and Chava was that if you eat from this, your das will increase to the point where you're going to be able to, you'll have powers where you'll be able to independently affect this world without God, that you will be able to know good and evil to the point where you will be able to affect and to do things in this world independent of God. That the increasement of knowledge, see, we're all living post the Chet. We're all post Chet Adam Rishon. And we naturally feel like, see, before the Chet, Adam and Chava were completely aware of the fact that Hashem is sustaining and giving chiyas to this world. And that their whole tachlis in this world was the Avdul L'Shamra, to take care of Gan Eden, to reveal Hashem's name in the world. That was it. That was their tachlis. They were 100% aware of it. And they were very much in flow with the fact that they were completely dependent on God. That everything that they do is completely, they were very much aware of that Hashem is constantly mechadish b'tuvo b'chol yom tamid maaseh bereshis, that Hashem is constantly recreating the world, va'at mechayes kulam, that Hashem is giving chiyas to everything, that all koach comes from Hashem, and that everything is being revived and given chiyas from Hashem. And they were very much aware of that. But after the Chet, the increasement of das leads each one of us to a place where we feel that we are disconnected, we're independent beings from God, and that we have the ability to accomplish and to be successful in this world without God. Even more than that, I mean, the Rambam really in Hilchos Tshuva discusses how really after the Chet is where we really got the high, that's when we really acquired the level of Bechira that we do, where we really view ourselves as independent beings and that we could make decisions, we could make distinctions, and we could choose and actually affect this world. But part of that, the negative side of that, is where we feel that we could affect this world independently of God. And it's even more than that, because from this Chet, what happened is where we now view this increasement of knowledge now gave us gives us the perception that every single thing is separate and every single thing has its own independent existence. To the point where even avodas Hashem, even service of Hashem, even our service of a God could turn into its own independent existence, independent from God. What do I mean? For example, obviously we know that, Torah could be Samachayim or Samamovis, that you could learn Torah. It could be the poison or the medicine of life or death. And that if you're learning Torah for your own covet and your own ego, it's the worst. Or even more than that, we know the idea that if you're supposed to be doing things at a specific time, like if you're supposed to be home, changing your kids' diapers, and you're in the base medrash learning, that obviously that's also wrong. But it's even more than that, where Rav Kluger really talks about this idea. A lot of what I'm saying comes from him. The idea of that we only appreciate the big things in Avodas Hashem. We only appreciate the things that we view as its own yesh, as it being its own thing. Like, okay, I said Tehillim. My daf yomi, that's meaning I have my goals, I have my accomplishments, I have my things that I could check off the list. I have the things that, where Rav Kluger really talks about the idea of, he calls it the Yeshiva Das Klipa, where we have our Seder in life. We have our Seder, we know how much we learn every day. And Seder is one of the most fundamental principles of growth, having structure. And it is very, very important. But that's only if it's there to help you accomplish more, so that you're not confused when you come to the next day. So I have my Seder and that's helping me move. But if it takes away from you being able to flow and feel free, to open yourself up to what is really the Ratzon, what does Hashem really want from me at this moment? Because this is not part of my structure. So then it's not good. What do I mean? Like an example, you could have like a tragedy in the world and Klal Yisrael gets together and they have an asifa where everyone's davening, everyone's saying Tehillim together. But how many times are you just walking down the street and just spontaneously right now, Hashem says, just open yourself up to Hashem and say, Hashem, just help Klal Yisrael, help this specific person heal. Or how many times are you sitting in the barber shop in Israel and you have like a random sefer sitting in front of you, which you could just open up. Right now we're in Shemos, but let's say you have just like there's a random Bamidbar just sitting there. So how many times do you just pick up that Bamidbar and just reading the Psukim? But because that's not choshev, because that's not important in our minds, that's not its own independent thing. Meaning, what's a couple Psukim? So then we can lose out the opportunity to flow with Hashem, to flow with what Hashem wants from us at that moment. And Purim, really, one of the most unbelievable psukim. I have to read this. Right here. I'm gonna flip the screen because this is the turning point in the Megillah. And it's like the most unbelievable pasuk in the world. It's one of the most. So what happens is, let's just do a quick recap of where we're at in the Megillah. So basically, Haman gets a little upset. Everyone's bowing down to him, besides one man, Mordechai. Mordechai is the one man who's not bowing down to Haman. And that eats Haman up. He can't live with that. That he has everything in the world. He's second in command. Everyone's bowing down to him. It's all worthless, Haman. That's a big klipa of Amalek, that nothing, it's all nothing, meaning to really focus on the negative. It's all worthless. If this guy is not bowing down to me, it's all worthless. So Haman comes to Achashverosh and he says, Achashverosh, there's this one nation, Yesh Am Echad mafurad beinu amim, that's spread out amongst all the nations that are causing trouble. I want to wipe him out. And Achashverosh gives him the signet ring. Haman says, I'll pay you. Achashverosh says, I don't really care. Take it without it. I don't need the money. And the Gezerah goes out. And the fourth parak of the Megillah opens up. Mordechai Yoda, Mordechai knows what happened. And he's sitting in sackcloth in front of the gate. And Esther sees this. And Esther says to her servant, go out and go give him new clothes. And find out what's going on. And so she goes out, and Mordechai tells her all that tells the messenger all that happened. And Mordechai tells Esther that it's upon you to go into Achashverosh and ask and beg to remove this decree for our nation. So Esther sends back and she says, I haven't been called to the king in 30 days. And that everyone knows that if you go into the king's palace without being called, you could get killed. So Mordechai responds with this. I should have brought the beginning also, but he says, Ki macharesh tacharishi bo'es kazos, that on the contrary, first, the pasuk before this, Mordechai tells Esther, just because you're in the king's palace, don't think that you're going to be saved. But even more than that, he says, Ki macharesh tacharishi bo'es hazos, that on the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place. While you and your father's house will perish. And who knows? And who knows? Perhaps this was the whole tachlis of all the horrific fact that you've been taken by Achashverosh, who's a Rasha, and that you've been suffering there. Who knows if it was only for this that you got to the king's palace? Maybe it was all for this. Maybe your whole life was for this given moment, for you to go in. And what Purim reveals, first of all, this pasuk teaches us two very important ideas. First of all, Hashem's plan is everything will play out. The way Hashem wants the world to go, it will go, and we will be saved. Everything will be taken care of. We will all be taken care of. There's nothing to worry about. The question is whether you want to be part of God's story or not. Mordechai says that if you don't go in, you and Esther, you will be forgotten forever. Meaning that the choice is really for us, each one in our own personal lives. It's not about us doing something, that our avoda actually changes the way history is going to play out. God's going to make things happen regardless. The question is whether we want to be part of that or not. And then he says even more. See, I just to open ourselves up to the idea, Esther was a tzaddikas. Esther, I'm sure, would have loved being home, just saying Tehillim all day, doing chesed, being a proper, good Bas Yisrael. Esther's not interested in being taken by the king who's a Rasha. She has no interest in that. However, Mordechai tells her that who knows, if could be that your whole life was for this given moment. And what Purim does, back to our original question, the idea of our original question is, what was the idea? What's the idea of chayv inish lebesume bepurai? What's the idea of nullifying one's das? What's the idea of bittul das. Das is something we appreciate, and then we explain the idea of das, as we know where Amalek comes from, where Amalek stems from, which is the chet Adam Arishon, which is the nachash, and that chet was vayisem kelokim, that you will be like God, yodea tov v'ra, and that the idea of that, the increasement of knowledge is the fact that now we view ourselves as independent beings, and that everything is separate, everything is disconnected from God, and that takes us away from being in flow with what Hashem really wants from us right now, and seeing the unity and everything that really we don't have the ability to accomplish anything without God. But even more than that, that our avodah is to remove all those obstacles that are preventing us from really being in flow with what Hashem wants from us at this moment. That Esther, this is not what she wanted right now. She had no interest in going into the king. She had no interest in being in the king's palace to begin with. But Hashem has his plan and wants us to serve him based off of the moment, being able to be free and open to exactly what we need to do right now, and to remove all the things that we've heard that we're supposed to do, all the things that we've done in the past, which prevent us to really tapping into what we need to do at this given moment. And of course, just on another level, Adlo Yoda brings us to the level where we realize that Mamish, it's all God. The idea of Ato Haresel Adas Ki Hashem Hu Elokim Ein Od Movado. The idea that you were shown that Hashem, who's Elokim, the idea of Elokim, which is Hateva, which, as explained in the Svarm, is the idea that name represents the concealment of God in this world, where Hashem's name is not mentioned once. In Megillah, the idea of Esther, which is Hastara, concealment. And that really it opens us to the idea that it's all God, and that he's running everything, and that all the negative and all the tragedy we see in this world, who knows what's better? Because really at the end of the day, v'nahafachu, we're going to experience that v'nahafachu. So that's one idea. That's one idea. But on another level, that's a very powerful idea. But on another idea, we spoke about last week, and the idea that Haman makes us feel, and Amalek makes us feel, it instills doubt within us that Amalek is Gematria Safek. Amalek is that Ha'im Hashem yesh b'karbeinu, Ha'im yesh Hashem b'karbeinu amayin, that Amalek instills, it's that the root of Amalek is that question, is that doubt that we have, that doubts God in our life, that doubts our own significance, that our avodah is worth anything to God. And that on Purim, another reason why we drink, and that's also prevents us from really flowing and be able to do things which don't seem important. That one tefillah while walking down the street, or just saying a random, just picking up a tehillim, and if you say tehillim every day, that's beautiful, but just to randomly pick up a tehillim, or just to randomly call up your friend and to say hello, or to schmooze with someone, whatever it is, that the reason why we don't appreciate that, and appreciate that Hashem desires that and wants that, is that question, is that doubt. And on Purim, the Sfas Emes talks about the idea that the fact that we were saved on Purim had nothing to do with our merit, had nothing to do with the fact that we were so special. We messed up big time. But that our relationship with Hashem is unconditional, and that Hashem desires us still, even after we blow it, even after we mess up, and that our avodah is important and it's significant. And that we drink on Purim because it's beyond das, meaning because our das tells me that if I do good things, so then Hashem likes me, or Hashem loves me then when I do good things. But if not, so then I'm bad and then I'm out. Purim shows and reveals the unconditional relationship and the essence of Hashem's love for us. And that we drink to open ourselves up, to get past our das, to get past that level that holds us back, where we think that we're only significant when we do X. And that we always have the ability to do tshuva no matter how far we are. Now we should be zocheh to really enter into Purim. This year, you guys have a Purim Shalosh. Soak it in, enjoy. And yeah, mamish, we should be zocheh to really get to the true meaning of Adelo Yada Ben Or Hamon Baruch Mordechai. Yesher koach, everyone.
Shkoach, Pesachia.
Yesher koach, couple. So good to see you.
With future and mirror. Shalom Aleichem. Nice to see you.
The best. So good to see everyone. How's everyone doing?